At my ex's wedding, his bride took the mic and said, "We all know she was never enough." But then his childhood nanny walked over to me, held my hand, and said, "You raised him when no one else would." The bride dropped her champagne. Me, 41 female, went to my ex-husband Vincent's, 44 male, wedding to the woman he left me for, Phoebe, 29 female. She got tipsy, took the mic, and said in front of everyone that we all know she was never enough while looking straight at me. I was about to leave, but then Vincent's childhood nanny walked up to me, took my hand, and said loud enough for the room to hear, "You raised him when no one else would." Phoebe dropped her champagne glass. The room went dead silent. I wasn't planning to go to the wedding. Let's start there. When the invitation showed up, I genuinely thought it was a mistake. It came in a thick, cream-colored envelope with gold trim and calligraphy that looked like someone paid too much for an online design service. Phoebe Lauren and Vincent Dupree request the honor of your presence. I remember laughing out loud when I opened it, because the nerve. After everything, this was how I found out they were getting married? Not that I cared anymore, not in the way people expect. But it stirred something in me, resentment that had dulled over time but never quite died. I met Vincent when I was just starting out in the New York art world, young, driven, always broke, but proud of it. He was already well into his law career, sleek and polished in a way that made you feel clumsy around him. He asked me out after I accidentally spilled wine on his shoe at an opening night. Our relationship started with laughter and quick dinners, and for a while, I thought we were building something that would last. We married at 24 and 27. The wedding was small, intimate, even. A converted barn in the Hudson Valley, with fairy lights and a jazz trio playing Ella Fitzgerald. We talked about kids, about moving to a bigger place, about spending every summer in Italy. And for a while, I believed him. I believed in us. Fast forward 10 years. I'm managing the gallery, working 10-hour days and pouring everything into that space. Vincent's long hours at the firm became longer. He stopped coming home before midnight. I told myself it was just stress. That he was tired. That I was too busy to notice, too tired myself to ask the hard questions. Then I found the emails. Phoebe was young, fresh out of Columbia Law, with a social media page full of rooftop brunches and boutique fitness classes. She called him Vinny in the emails. I still remember that because no one ever called him that, not even me. There was one message where she wrote, "It's like she doesn't even see you anymore." I remember staring at that sentence and wondering when I'd stopped seeing him. Or if maybe, it had been the other way around all along. When I confronted him, he didn't yell. He didn't even deny it. Just looked tired, like he'd been caught in something he didn't even try to escape. He told me, "It's not what you think," but never explained what it was. I asked him if he loved her. He looked at the floor and said, "I don't know." And that was it. We divorced quietly. No wrongdoing. No drama. Just paperwork and silence. I got the gallery, he got the condo and the Audi. I signed the papers in my lawyer's office and cried the entire Uber ride home, alone. The next few years were a blur. Therapy, renovations, pouring myself into the gallery until it became something even I couldn't recognize. I made it beautiful. I made myself useful. I dated, occasionally. But nothing serious. Nothing that felt like home. So when that wedding invite came, it felt like someone was reopening a wound that never fully healed. And still, I went. Not to make a statement. Not for closure. Not even to see him. I went because for once, I wanted to stop pretending the past didn't happen. The wedding was in Charleston, of all places. I flew in the day before and stayed at a small inn near King Street. The kind with creaky wooden floors and lace curtains that don't quite cover the windows. I packed one dress, a deep emerald green, silk, sleeveless. Elegant but not trying too hard. I didn't even know if I'd stay for the reception. I just wanted to be there. I wanted to see it for myself. The ceremony was beautiful, annoyingly so. The venue was some historical estate with brick pathways and trees older than time. Phoebe looked like a fashion editorial, slim, statuesque, with perfect posture and a gown that probably cost more than my car. Vincent looked the same. Just older. A little heavier in the face, a little grayer at the temples. But still composed. I sat near the back. A few heads turned when I entered, but no one said anything. Some people knew who I was, but most probably didn't. I watched them say their vows. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I just sat there, detached. It felt like I was watching a movie I'd already seen before. I stayed longer than I meant to. The reception was in a glass-walled pavilion at the back of the estate, strung up with lights and filled with people who smelled like expensive cologne and wealth. I found a seat by the corner, near the open bar. I smiled at the waiter who poured me champagne. I even chatted briefly with someone from Vincent's firm, someone who looked uncomfortable the whole time. Then it happened. Phoebe got up to speak. Maybe it was the champagne. Maybe it was the attention. But she stood up in her glittering gown, holding a mic like she was about to do a stand-up routine. I just want to say, she started, swaying slightly, that love is messy. And hard. And real love comes when you're brave enough to let go of things that were never right in the first place. People clapped politely. She continued, and I know not everyone was happy when we got together. But we all know she was never enough. She looked at me. Directly. Not around. Not past. At me. The room froze. A few gasps. A nervous laugh from somewhere. Vincent didn't move. Didn't say anything. Just stared at his champagne glass like it held answers. I stood up. Not because I wanted to make a scene. But because I couldn't breathe. I was halfway to the door when someone grabbed my hand. Lucille. Vincent's childhood nanny. I hadn't seen her in over a decade. She was shorter than I remembered, but still solid, like the kind of woman who kept families from falling apart. She took my hand, looked me in the eyes, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You raised him when no one else would." Phoebe dropped her glass. The sound of shattering crystal echoed like thunder in that hall. No one moved. No one said a word. Vincent looked up. His face pale. Phoebe stood frozen, one hand over her mouth, the other still holding the mic like it had betrayed her. Lucille just patted my hand and said, "You don't have to take that, baby. Let them see who he really is." And then she walked me out. We stepped outside, Lucille and I, into the thick Charleston evening air that smelled faintly of gardenias and the ocean. The buzz of cicadas filled the quiet like a strange applause, louder than anything anyone inside had the courage to say. I remember thinking, did that really just happen? Lucille didn't let go of my hand for a while. She walked with me down the gravel path toward the edge of the property like we were just taking a stroll, like she hadn't just dropped a social explosive in the middle of a high-profile wedding. "You look good," she said casually, her voice gentle but grounded. "I feel like a deer that wandered into traffic." She smiled softly. "Well, you walked out of it just fine." We sat on a stone bench under a live oak tree, far enough from the lights to be in our own little pocket of peace. I realized I hadn't taken a full breath all evening until that moment. Lucille looked straight ahead when she spoke again. "I almost didn't come. Haven't seen Vincent since your divorce. He stopped calling once Phoebe moved in. Guess he didn't want anyone around who remembered how he used to be." I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to start picking apart that sentence. I didn't want to talk about the versions of Vincent that existed before the one who left. "I saw your name on the guest list," she continued, and I told myself, if she's brave enough to show up, I'm sure as heck not gonna let her stand in that room alone. Something cracked in me then. Not the kind of break that leads to tears or sobbing. Just a quiet unraveling. A thread loosening after being pulled too tight for too long. "Thank you," I said. Two small words, but they carried so much. She patted my knee like she used to when I was 25, overwhelmed, and curled up on her kitchen floor during a storm while Vincent was at work. Funny how quickly memories climb out of the dark when you think you buried them. I stayed outside for maybe 20 minutes. Long enough to feel human again. I didn't know what was happening back inside, and honestly, I didn't care. I didn't want to know how they were spinning it, how Phoebe would recover from that moment. That wasn't my business anymore. Still, I wasn't ready to leave. I didn't want to sneak off and make it look like I'd been chased away. So eventually, I walked back in. The atmosphere had changed. Like a balloon that had deflated just slightly. People weren't as loud, the laughter forced. Some heads turned when I came back through the door. Others quickly looked away. A few faces, women mostly, watched me with something I couldn't quite place. Not pity. Something closer to respect. I didn't go back to my table. I stood near the back by the catering station, sipping water and staring at the chandelier. The tension in the room was thick enough to chew. Then Vincent walked over. I saw him coming before he saw me. His jacket was off, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. He looked like he'd just been told something he didn't want to believe. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice quiet. I shrugged. "Sure." We stepped outside again, this time into a side garden with tall hedges and a fountain that sounded louder than it should have in the silence. He looked down at his hands, then up at me. I didn't know she was going to say that. "I believe you," I said. And I did. "But you didn't stop her either." He winced like I'd slapped him. I froze. "I know. You always do when things get real." He didn't deny it. Just looked away. "I'm sorry," he said after a long pause. "For all of it." I nodded. "You should be." He looked back at me then, eyes a little glassy. Not from tears. From guilt, maybe. Or shame. "I loved you, Marlena." "That's the thing," I said, calmly. "You loved me like I was a phase. Like I was practice for the life you actually wanted. And you know what? That's fine. But don't rewrite the past like I wasn't the one who held it all together when you were falling apart." He looked like he wanted to argue, but couldn't. Because deep down, he knew it was true. I was never your enemy, Vincent. I was your beginning. But you made me your ending. He didn't say anything after that. Just nodded slowly, like he was finally processing something too big to carry alone. And then I left him there. In the garden. With his regrets. I didn't return to the reception. I walked back to my rental car, slipped off my heels, and drove to the inn barefoot, the windows down, the Charleston wind warm against my face. My phone buzzed twice on the way back, one text from Lucille checking I was safe, and one from an unknown number I didn't need to open to know who it was. I didn't reply to either. Not yet. The rest of the night passed in a strange kind of silence. Not empty, but full. Full of everything I'd carried, and everything I was finally starting to let go. The next morning, I woke up earlier than I expected. Sunlight poured through the thin curtains, painting long streaks across the old wooden floor. I sat up in bed, still wearing the tank top and leggings I'd thrown on after the wedding, the emerald dress hanging over the back of a chair like a memory. There was a lightness in my chest that felt foreign. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the weight of wondering what might have been with Vincent. There was no fantasy version of us lingering in my head. No imagined life where we grew old together. Just facts. Just history. I had loved him. I had sacrificed for him. And he had chosen someone else. And I had survived it. I made coffee in the little kitchenette by the window and sat down with my phone. A couple of missed calls from a New Jersey area code. I didn't have to guess. Phoebe had my number once, back when she was just a colleague trying to arrange a surprise birthday dinner for Vincent. She'd found a way in back then. Now she wanted out, or maybe just control over the narrative. There was also a text from Lucille, hope you slept okay. Don't let yesterday live in your head rent-free. You did good. I replied, thank you. For everything. I checked out of the inn by 10. The woman at the front desk gave me a tight-lipped smile, the kind that said I know exactly who you are and what happened at that wedding. Charleston may be a big city, but that circle? Tiny. Gossip traveled faster than the humidity. I took my time walking around the city before heading to the airport. There's something about Charleston streets, cobblestone, uneven, old with pride, that made me feel grounded. Like even things that get broken, or weathered, can still be beautiful. While I was browsing inside a bookstore on Broad Street, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Vincent. I shouldn't have opened it. But I did. I don't know how to fix what I broke. I just want you to know I never meant to hurt you. I stared at it for a while. Part of me wanted to respond with something final. Something sharp. But I didn't. Not because I was above it. Because I didn't owe it anymore. Letting it go felt more powerful than anything I could have said. Back in New Jersey, life returned quickly to its familiar rhythm. The gallery was preparing for a spring exhibition, a mix of modern sculpture and watercolors by an up-and-coming local artist I'd discovered through a community outreach program. My staff was excited. They kept things running like a tight ship, but I could sense they were watching me closely, waiting for signs of unraveling. But I didn't unravel. Instead, I worked. I scheduled meetings. I curated art. I took the long way home and cooked for myself again. I signed up for a dance class on a whim, something I hadn't done since my 20s. It took about 2 weeks before I heard anything more about the incident, as one of my mutuals delicately called it in a message. Apparently, Phoebe's comment had made waves. People had talked. A few guests walked out after the toast, uncomfortable. Someone told me the caterer's assistant said it was the most awkward reception they'd ever worked. The perfect wedding had cracked. Then came the real surprise. Lucille sent me a letter. A handwritten one. Inside the envelope was a short note, and beneath it, a copy of an old photograph. It was from our second wedding anniversary. We'd had dinner in our apartment with just a few friends. I was in the kitchen, apron tied loosely around my waist, laughing at something Vincent had said. He was looking at me, not smiling, but staring in that way he used to when he didn't think anyone was watching. Lucille's note read, I kept this because you looked happy. Real happy. I thought you should have it now, not because of him, but because that version of you, the one who laughed and filled a room, she's still there. Don't let what happened convince you otherwise. That's the thing people don't talk about enough after divorce. Not the betrayal. Not the court papers or dividing up the dishes. But how easy it is to forget who you were before the pain. Before you turned down the volume on your own joy just to keep the peace. I kept the photo. Not because I wanted to remember Vincent. But because I wanted to remember me. One night, about 3 weeks after the wedding, I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years, Tasha, one of the paralegals from Vincent's old firm. We bumped into each other at a small gallery opening in Brooklyn. She did a double take when she saw me, but quickly smiled. I heard about what happened, she said after a while, lowering her voice. I just wanted to say, I always thought you deserved better. It wasn't much. But it was honest. She told me Phoebe had taken some time off work. That things were tense. That Lucille had become something of a legend among the younger staff, like a truth-telling oracle who said what everyone else had only dared to whisper. And then she leaned in and said, I'm glad you showed up. Not everyone would have had the guts. It stuck with me, that word, guts. Because I hadn't felt brave at the time. I'd felt terrified. Embarrassed. But sometimes courage isn't loud or fierce. Sometimes it's just showing up, even when your hands are shaking. I didn't ask about Vincent. I didn't want updates. Not anymore. But one night, I opened my journal, something I'd stopped writing in around the time of our divorce, and I wrote, he will never understand what it cost me to love him. But I understand what it cost me to stay. And I paid it. In full. And that, I think, was the first time I really knew it was over. Not the marriage, that ended on paper years ago. But the part of me that still felt haunted by his choices, the version of me that thought maybe I should have done more, been more. That part was quiet now. I wasn't healed. Not fully. That's not how it works. But I was healing. And I was no longer waiting for anyone to see it but me. About a month later, I was in the middle of hanging a new collection, a series of abstract landscapes from a Vermont painter I'd discovered through a juried show, when my assistant Clara walked in with an envelope. "It's hand-delivered," she said, raising an eyebrow. "Courier just dropped it off. Said it was urgent." I took it, puzzled. No return address, just my name written in sharp, precise handwriting I recognized before even opening it. Phoebe. I sat down at my desk, peeled the envelope open, and unfolded the paper. It wasn't long. "Marlena, I owe you an apology. What I said at the wedding was inexcusable. I was drunk, insecure, and trying to make a spectacle out of something I didn't fully understand. You didn't deserve that, no one does. I thought if I could humiliate you, I could erase you. I was wrong. I see now that you weren't the shadow I thought I had to compete with. You were the one who gave Vincent his light in the first place. And if I'm honest, that's probably why he still looks for you in the quiet moments. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just acknowledgement. You didn't lose. You loved him when it was hard. You gave him a foundation I benefit from every day. I've been living in a house you built. I'm sorry. Phoebe. I sat with the letter for a long time. Not because it hurt, but because it didn't. Not anymore. Her words didn't sting. They didn't cut. They just landed like leaves on water. And in that strange, full-circle way life sometimes works, they were exactly what I needed, not from her, but from the universe. The acknowledgement that I wasn't crazy. That I had mattered. That even the woman he left me for saw it now. But the real closure? That came later. It started with a phone call from an old friend in publishing, Alana, someone who used to buy pieces from my gallery for coffee table books. She called to tell me there was an opening for a guest speaker at a professional women's retreat in the Catskills, women in business, leadership, and creative industries. They needed someone with a real story. Someone who'd been through fire and come out intact. You came to mind immediately, she said. I hesitated. I'd never spoken publicly about my marriage, my divorce, or what happened after. But something in me stirred. Maybe it was the years of swallowing my voice. Maybe it was Lucille's words still echoing in my chest. Or maybe I just knew it was time to reclaim my own story. I said yes. 3 months later, I stood in front of a room full of brilliant women, CEOs, artists, nonprofit founders, and told my truth. Not as a victim. Not as a cautionary tale. But as a woman who had been dismantled and rebuilt herself with better blueprints. I didn't name names. I didn't trash Vincent or Phoebe. That wasn't the point. I talked about rebuilding. About finding joy in solitude. About refusing to define your worth by someone else's ability to see it. The room was quiet. No one looked away. And when I finished, I got a standing ovation, not for theatrics, but for truth. Later that night, while sipping wine on the lodge patio under a string of fairy lights, Alana sat next to me. You know who's going to read about this, right? She said with a grin. Your ex. He's gonna hear all about this talk. Probably from someone in his firm. Maybe even his wife. I smiled. Not out of spite. But satisfaction. That's the revenge people don't talk about enough. Living well. Living truthfully. And becoming someone they can't explain away. A few weeks later, an email came through my gallery inbox. It was from a journalist writing a feature on women over 40 redefining success after personal reinvention. Someone had pitched my name. Probably Alana. We did a phone interview. She asked about the gallery, about my new mentorship program for young female artists, and then, gently, about my past. I told her what mattered. I told her I lost a husband but found myself. That I built something of value out of something that once broke me. That I didn't get even. I got better. The article went semi-viral in the New York creative community. A few days after it was published, I got a notification on LinkedIn, Vincent Dupree viewed your profile. I laughed. That same week, a young woman came into the gallery. Mid-20s. Nervous. Said she'd just moved from out of state and heard I sometimes take on ments. I read your article, she said. I thought maybe, if someone like you could come through all that and still be standing, maybe I can too. I offered her coffee. We sat down. I listened. And as she spoke, I realized that revenge doesn't need to be sharp, or loud, or even planned. Sometimes revenge is becoming the person your past said you'd never be. Sometimes, it's building a beautiful life, and leaving the door wide open for someone else to walk through.